Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to explore a fascinating period in history with a focus on weavers, iron smelters, and factory owners. This is the first slide of our presentation, which sets the stage for understanding how these groups shaped the industrial age. Over the next few slides, we'll look into their roles, their impact on society, and how they contributed to the transformation of industry and economy. I'm excited to guide you through this journey, so let's get started. Let's take a look at the contents of this presentation. We start with the introduction, then move on to the spinning jenny, which was a significant invention in textile manufacturing. Next, we explore the art of weaving, an ancient craft that played a crucial role in Indian textiles. We also examine India's place in the world market, highlighting its historic trade connections. Moving forward, we'll discuss the rise of cotton mills and the contributions of Richard Arkwright, a key figure in the Industrial Revolution. We'll look at the decline of Indian textiles and see how economic shifts affected traditional industries, including the abandoned furnaces in villages. Then, we focus on Mumbai textile mills, an important hub of industrial activity, and the ongoing developments that follow. We'll cover reasons for the decline of iron smelting, which was vital for many industries, and see how abandoned ironworks tell stories of change. Next, we look at iron and steel factories coming up in India, showcasing industrial progress. We also highlight the significance of the sword of Tipu Sultan and Wootz steel, renowned for its strength and history. As we move along, we'll revisit Indian weavers, a segment that underscores their skills and global reach. We'll also examine hope in the form of new industries and the story of Wootz steel, which was famous worldwide. Finally, we'll see the Tata Iron and Steel Company, or TISCO, a symbol of India's modern industrialization. This overview connects all these points to help us understand how India's textile and steel industries evolved over time, shaping its economic history. Let's start by understanding the role of the English East India Company. Initially, it came to India primarily to trade in Indian goods. Over time, however, it gradually took control of large parts of our country, and this shift greatly changed the pattern of trade. During British rule, Indian crafts and industries focused mainly on two sectors: textiles and iron and steel. These were the backbone of our traditional industries, but their development was affected by colonial policies. It's important to note that Britain's industrialization was closely linked to its colonization of India. The Industrial Revolution in Britain created a demand for raw materials, which India could supply, and also for markets to sell finished goods. Back in the 18th century, India was actually a leading nation in terms of craft production and trade. Our craftsmen and traders were highly skilled and renowned globally. But as the Industrial Revolution gained momentum, Britain earned the nickname Workshop of the World because of its rapid industrial growth. This growth in industrial production led British industrialists to see India as a huge market for their manufactured goods. Over the years, this resulted in a flood of British-made products entering India, which impacted our local industries and traditional crafts. So, in summary, the connection between Britain's industrial growth and its colonization of India was profound, influencing trade patterns and shaping the economic landscape of our country during that period. Around 1750, India was actually the world's largest producer of cotton textiles, which is quite remarkable when you think about the scale and quality of their production. Indian textiles were highly renowned not only for their fine quality, but also for the exquisite craftsmanship that went into making them. This craftsmanship was a key part of what made Indian textiles so sought after globally. Starting from the 16th century, European traders began recognizing the value of these textiles and started purchasing them in large quantities. They would then sell these beautiful fabrics across Europe, which helped establish a significant trade network. This historical context is important because it shows how India was integrated into the global economy even back then, and it sets the stage for understanding how trade and craftsmanship influenced the development of textile industries worldwide. It's really a testament to India's rich textile heritage and its impact on the world market. Let's talk about how words can tell us fascinating histories about Indian textiles. In Western markets, Indian fabrics were known by different names such as muslin, calico, chintz, and bandhana. Starting with muslin, this was first made in the city of Mosul, which is now in Iraq, and that's where the name comes from. The word muslin actually refers to any finely woven textile used for making cloth, highlighting its quality and craftsmanship. Next, we have calico. This term is a bit broader, used for all cotton textiles used for making clothes. The story behind calico is interesting. When the Portuguese arrived in India searching for spices, they landed in Calicut on the Kerala coast. The cotton textiles they brought back to Europe, along with spices, came to be called calico, linking the name to that specific region. Then there's chintz, which means a printed cotton cloth. This word is derived from the Hindi word, hint, which refers to a cloth decorated with small, colorful, flowery designs. Finally, we have bandhana. This word refers to brightly colored, printed scarves tied around the neck or head, and it comes from the Hindi word bandhana, meaning to tie. These names not only tell us about the textiles themselves, but also reveal how Indian fabrics influenced global markets and language. It's a perfect example of how trade and cultural exchange leave lasting marks on our vocabulary and history. Now, moving on to Indian textiles in the European markets during the 18th century. As Indian textiles gained popularity across Europe, especially in England, they started to worry the local wool and silk producers. You can imagine their concern. These Indian cotton fabrics were becoming incredibly fashionable and, more importantly, more affordable. In response, the English textile industry began protesting against the import of Indian cotton textiles. This led to the enactment of the Calico Act in 1720, which was a law that banned the use of printed cotton textiles in England. The main goal was to protect local industries from this rising competition. At that time, the textile industries in England were just beginning to develop. They found it really challenging to compete with the Indian textiles, which were both high quality and popular. So, in order to protect their markets, they restricted Indian textiles from entering England. But competition was tough, and the English weavers didn't just sit back, they innovated. They looked for ways to produce cloth more cheaply and efficiently. One major breakthrough was the invention of new machines. For instance, in 1764, John Kay invented the spinning jenny, which significantly increased the productivity of traditional spinning wheels. This innovation was a game changer because it allowed English textile producers to manufacture fabric faster and more cheaply, helping them to compete with Indian textiles in the European market. So, this period reflects a critical moment where Indian textiles influenced European markets and prompted technological advancements in England, shaping the future of textile manufacturing. Now, let's talk about the spinning jenny. This was a revolutionary invention, a multi-spool spinning wheel that really changed the game. What made it so significant was how much it reduced the amount of work needed to produce yarn. Instead of one spool at a time, a single worker could operate 8 or more spools simultaneously. This dramatically increased productivity and efficiency in textile manufacturing. And connecting this to the broader theme of technological progress, it's important to note that just a few years later, in 1786, Richard Arkwright invented the steam engine. This invention further transformed cotton textile weaving by powering larger machines and enabling even greater scale and speed. Both of these innovations, the spinning jenny and the steam engine, highlight how technological advancements propelled the Industrial Revolution forward, making production faster, cheaper, and more efficient, ultimately changing the fabric of society. Now, let's talk about Richard Arkwright and his incredible contribution to the Industrial Revolution. What he managed to do was to combine several key elements: power, machinery, semi-skilled labor, and a new raw material, cotton. By doing this, he essentially created mass production. This meant that cloth could now be woven cheaply and in enormous quantities, making textiles more accessible than ever before. However, it's important to remember that, despite these innovations, Indian textiles still dominated the world trade until the late 1700s. The Dutch, French, and English trading companies made huge profits from this trade. They would buy cotton and silk textiles in India and pay for them in silver, which was a valuable and scarce resource at the time. But then, when the English East India Company gained political power in Bengal, everything started to change. They stopped paying for these textiles with silver. Instead, they collected revenue directly from the local peasants and zamindars, who were essentially landholders, and used that revenue to buy Indian textiles. This shift not only increased their control over trade, but also set the stage for Britain's growing dominance in global textiles and trade. So this slide really highlights how technological innovations and geopolitical shifts intertwined to shape the global textile industry during this period. Let's talk about the Indian weavers and their important role in history. Weavers were highly specialized in their craft, focusing on weaving textiles with great skill and precision. This knowledge and expertise were passed down from one generation to the next, ensuring the preservation of their craft and techniques over centuries. Within India, there were several distinct communities of weavers, each with their own unique traditions and styles. For example, the Tanti weavers of Bengal were renowned for their fine fabrics. In North India, the Julahas or Maman weavers played a vital role in local textile production. Meanwhile, in South India, communities like the Sale, Kaikalar, and Devangs contributed richly to the region's weaving heritage. Understanding these different groups helps us see how weaving was not just a craft, but a vital part of cultural identity across India. Their skills and communities thrived, and their influence can still be seen today, connecting to the larger story of Indian craftsmanship and economic history. Now let's explore the art of weaving. First, cotton was spun into yarn, a process called spinning, which was primarily done by women. They used simple household tools like the charka and the tackli. The charka was used to spin the thread, while the tackli helped roll and manage the yarn. Once the spinning was complete, the thread was handed over to the weaver, who wove it into cloth. Interestingly, weaving was mostly a task done by men. This entire process highlights how essential and skilled the craft of textile making has been throughout history, connecting directly to the broader theme of traditional craftsmanship and cultural heritage. Now, let's look at the decline of Indian textiles and how the development of cotton industries in Britain played a significant role. As Britain expanded its own cotton industries, Indian textile producers found themselves facing tough competition. Indian textiles had to compete with British textiles not just locally, but also in international markets across Europe and America. Additionally, exporting Indian textiles to England became increasingly difficult because very high duties were imposed on these imports. This made Indian textiles more expensive and less competitive in the British market. In the early 19th century, there was a clear preference for English-made cotton textiles over Indian goods. This shift greatly impacted Indian textiles, causing them to lose their market share in places like Africa, America, and Europe. Overall, this decline reflects how the rise of British industry and protective policies disrupted traditional Indian textile markets, fitting into the broader theme of colonial economic changes. As we look at this slide, it's important to understand how deeply the textile industry in India was affected. Thousands of weavers across the country, especially in Bengal, found themselves without work. This was a huge blow to their livelihoods and to the communities that depended on them. During this period, European and British companies essentially stopped buying Indian textiles, which meant a significant loss of export opportunities. In the 1830s, we see a flood of British cotton cloth entering Indian markets. This wasn't just a small influx, it overwhelmed local products. By the 1880s, 2/3 of all the cotton clothes worn by Indians were actually made in Britain. This shift had a profound impact on India's textile industry, which was once thriving and self-sufficient. The consequences weren't just economic, they affected the social fabric as well. Thousands of rural women, who relied on weaving for their income, lost their jobs. This story highlights how colonial economic policies and global trade practices disrupted traditional industries and livelihoods, tying into our broader discussion of colonial impacts on local economies and societies. During the national movement, Mahatma Gandhi played a crucial role by urging people to boycott imported textiles and instead embrace hand-spun and hand-woven cloth. This was more than just about clothing. It was a movement to promote self-reliance and economic independence. Khadi, the hand-spun fabric, gradually became a powerful symbol of nationalism, representing our collective desire for freedom and self-sufficiency. The charkha, or spinning wheel, came to symbolize India itself, a tool of empowerment and unity. Interestingly, it was even placed at the very center of the tricolor flag of the Indian National Congress, adopted in 1931, emphasizing its importance in our fight for independence. This slide highlights how a simple tool became a symbol of hope, resilience, and national pride, tying into the broader theme of our struggle to reclaim our identity and sovereignty. So, in 1854, we see the emergence of cotton mills in India, starting with a spinning mill in Bombay. This marked the beginning of our industrial journey. By 1900, Bombay had over 84 mills in operation, which was quite significant. However, the colonial government didn't really support this growth. In fact, they made it harder by denying import duty benefits on British goods, which limited local industry development. Meanwhile, other cities like Ahmedabad and Kanpur also began establishing their own mills, with Ahmedabad starting its first mill in 1861 and Kanpur following in 1862. Despite this progress, the textile mills faced many challenges early on. One of the biggest issues was competition from cheaper textiles imported from Britain, which made it difficult for Indian mills to thrive. It's also important to note that in most countries, governments actively supported their industries by imposing high duties on imports to protect local production. India, however, was different in that regard. The real turning point came during the First World War, when textile imports from Britain declined sharply. This created a major boost for Indian cotton factories, as they were called upon to produce cloth for military supplies, helping to kickstart and expand domestic industrialization. This period clearly highlights how external factors, like global conflicts, can significantly influence industrial growth. Now, moving on to Mumbai textile mills, it's important to recognize how Mumbai became a significant hub for textile manufacturing. The city developed a strong industrial base, especially in textiles, which contributed heavily to its economic growth. This growth helped establish Mumbai as a central player in the textile industry, attracting both local and international investments. Switching gears a bit, let's talk about Ahmedabad, often called the Manchester of India. This nickname highlights its prominence as a major textile center, much like Manchester was in England. Ahmedabad's rise as a textile hub was driven by innovative mills and a skilled workforce, making it a key player in the industry. Both Mumbai and Ahmedabad demonstrate how Indian cities became vital nodes in the global textile network. They showcase the broader theme of industrial development and economic diversification in India. These cities not only contributed to local economies, but also positioned India as a significant player in the global textile trade. Let's take a closer look at the sword of Tipu Sultan and the remarkable steel known as woots. Tipu Sultan ruled Mysore until 1799, and he's remembered not only for his leadership, but also for his bravery in 4 wars against the British. Unfortunately, he died fighting with his sword in hand, a symbol of his courage. Today, Tipu's swords are treasured pieces and can be found in museums across England. Now, what made Tipu Sultan's swords special? Well, they were incredibly hard and sharp, capable of ripping through armor with ease. This exceptional quality came from a unique type of high-carbon steel called woots. Woots was produced throughout South India and was famous for creating swords with a very sharp edge. But what made these swords truly stand out was the beautiful flowing water pattern that appeared on the blade. This distinctive pattern was formed by tiny carbon crystals embedded within the iron. These crystals gave the steel its remarkable strength and sharpness. So, when we consider the craftsmanship behind Tipu Sultan's sword, we're looking at a perfect blend of advanced metallurgical techniques and artistry. It's a wonderful example of how local Indian steel technology contributed to exceptional weaponry, connecting to our broader theme of India's rich history of innovation in metallurgy. Let's talk about woot steel, a remarkable material produced throughout South India. The process involved mixing iron with charcoal inside small clay pots, which were then placed in a smelting furnace. The key to its quality was the precise control of temperature during the smelting process, which allowed the production of high-quality steel ingots. These ingots were essential for crafting the legendary swords associated with Tipu Sultan. In fact, Francis Buchanan, who visited Mysore in 1800, just a year after Tipu Sultan's death, documented the intricate techniques used in making these swords. He noted that hundreds of smelting furnaces in Mysore were dedicated to producing woot steel. Iron and charcoal were carefully combined inside these small clay vessels, and through meticulous temperature regulation, skilled smelters created the steel ingots used for some of the most renowned swords of the period. This craftsmanship highlights the advanced metallurgical knowledge of the time, and it connects to our broader theme of India's rich tradition of innovation and excellence in metalworking. As the British established their political power in India, we see a significant shift happening in local industries. One key change was the discontinuation of woot steel production, which had been a highly valued and renowned craft. With this decline, many iron smelting furnaces that once supported these industries were left unused and abandoned. This not only marked the end of a traditional craft, but also reflected the broader impact of colonial rule on local craftsmanship and industry. These abandoned furnaces serve as a physical reminder of how political and economic changes can disrupt long-standing technological and cultural practices. Connecting this to our overall theme, it highlights how colonial influence often led to the decline of indigenous industries and technological expertise. One of the key reasons for the decline of iron smelting was the introduction of new forest laws during the colonial period. These laws prevented local people from entering reserved forests, which made it difficult for iron smelters to find the necessary wood for making charcoal and also restricted access to iron ore. Despite these restrictions, many smelters continued to enter the forests secretly to collect wood, defying the laws. However, this was not a sustainable solution. Eventually, they were allowed to access the resources legally, but only by paying heavy taxes, which significantly cut into their profits. Another major factor was the rise of imports. By the late 19th century, Britain was exporting iron and steel to India, which flooded the market. This made it harder for local smelters to compete because imported iron was often cheaper and more readily available. Furthermore, Indian ironsmiths started using imported iron to produce utensils and tools. This shift reduced the demand for locally produced iron, further undermining the local iron smelting industry. All these factors, legal restrictions, high taxes, and the influx of cheaper imported iron, contributed to the decline of traditional iron smelting in India. It's a clear example of how colonial policies and global market forces can impact local industries. In 1904, American geologist Charles Weld and Dorabji Tata made a significant discovery in India. They found iron ore in the Rajhara Hills of Chhattisgarh. This region was actually the homeland of the Agaria community, who had been living there for generations. The Rajhara Hills were remarkable because they contained some of the finest iron ore in the entire world, which was a huge find for India. However, despite this promising discovery, the Tata group faced a challenge. The area around the Rajhara Hills was very dry, which made it difficult to set up an iron and steel factory because steel production requires a lot of water. So they couldn't immediately start their factory there. A few years later, they decided to clear a large area of forest along the banks of the Subarnarekha River to build the factory. This location provided better access to water, which was essential for steel manufacturing. They named the industrial township Jamshedpur in honor of Dorabji Tata's father, Jamsetji Tata. This story highlights how resource availability and geographic factors influence industrial development. It also connects to the broader theme of how India's industrial growth was driven by strategic resource discoveries and thoughtful planning. So, let's talk about the Tata Iron and Steel Company, or TISCO, which was established in Jamshedpur. They started producing steel in 1912, which was quite a significant milestone. What's interesting is that TISCO was set up at just the right time in history. Up until then, India was importing steel from Britain, especially as the railway network was expanding rapidly across the country. This expansion created a huge demand for rails, and Britain was the main supplier. However, there was a lot of doubt among British experts working with the Indian railways. They were often skeptical about whether India could produce good quality steel locally. But the situation changed dramatically in 1914 with the outbreak of the First World War. Suddenly, Britain needed all the steel it could produce for the war effort in Europe, which meant they couldn't supply India as freely as before. This situation created a real opportunity for India to develop its own steel industry and become more self-reliant, aligning with the broader theme of indigenous industrial growth and economic independence. As we wrap up, let's look at how the industrial landscape in India evolved during this period. When British steel imports declined, Indian railways turned to TISCO, marking a shift towards local manufacturing. As the war continued for several years, TISCO's role expanded significantly, producing shells and carriage wheels for the war effort. By 1919, the colonial government was purchasing about 90% of TISCO's steel, highlighting its importance. In fact, TISCO quickly became the biggest steel industry within the entire British Empire. This expansion wasn't limited to steel alone. Industries like iron and steel, as well as cotton textiles, grew notably when British imports into India decreased. This created a market for Indian industrial goods, especially during and after World War I. At the same time, the strength of the independence movement was growing, and the industrial class became more influential. The British government, facing increasing pressure, struggled to maintain control. In the last decades of colonial rule, they had to make concessions and respond to the rising demands of Indians. All these points connect back to the larger theme of how economic and political shifts in India laid the groundwork for independence, fueled by a burgeoning industrial class and changing dynamics with Britain.